Welcome to Secrets of Successful Advisors with Ken Heyman, the podcast where we dive deep into the habits, mindsets, and strategies that set top financial advisors apart. I'm Scott Tatum, and today I'll be talking to Ken to explore his thoughts on keeping the assets that you've already got in your practice. Ken, let's get our listeners in the right frame of mind. You can't delve deeply into the psyche of clients while dwelling in our busy world. So let's leave the outside world behind for 25 minutes and look deep inside human behavior to explore the science of clients, setting instincts aside so that insights can guide. And Ken, we're going to direct your insights to a different problem today. So many of the podcasts that we've done, so much of the content that everyone in the practice management space focuses on is how to bring in high quality new clients. And though that is absolutely important, let's focus on keeping some of those qualitative assets in the practice. And I think a great way to kind of start this discussion and start the exploration with you is one of the things that creates risk in an advisor's practice is the constant attention on what I have to do today. Where are there really specific threats that short-term perspective can cause? What problems can that lead to in an advisor's practice today?
Well, there's two big things, Scott, and they're very different from each other, and they come from two different places. So let's start with the most immediate one, and that is the mindset of the advisor and the questions that dominate their thinking. If you talk to advisors, as you and I do on a daily basis, and we've done this now for decades, what you find is that there's this common artifact of being a financial advisor. And it goes back to the earliest days of most people's practice when the thing that mattered most, more than anything else in the world, was the conversation with the next client. The advisor, the brand new advisor, is talking with a lot of people. They bring in clients who are not that desirable in the early stages. A lot of people would, if they have a pulse and two dimes to rub together, that was a client that you would want to, work with while you're building your business. And I can tell you there's a lot of advisors out there that remember that those first clients in the first 1 or 2 years of their practice are no longer and have not been clients for a long time because it really required them to quickly move up market to more substantial opportunities as soon as they could. So one of the artifacts of that experience for an advisor is this focus on where can I get the next client? Where can I get the next client? Where can I get the next client? And if you look at advisors' behavior, what you'll see across a large number of advisors is that finding that new client actually consumes more of their attention and concern than even serving their existing clients. So that's not what I want to talk about today, because most of the great advisors out there really understand that there's a dynamic tension constantly between I have to take care of the people I have and I have to find new clients. So if you look at the great advisors who are living out this behavioral pattern that got established when they first started building their business, there's these two dominating questions that consume them. And actually, if push comes to shove, summarize the way they think about their business. And those two questions are, what is my client asking for today? And in many cases, the advisor creates a staffing circumstance for people to take care of that. Their client associate or their servicing provider or the relationship manager is supposed to take care of the clients. And their real creative energy is going to, how can I find the next client? And so time, in the sense of what they're thinking about in terms of duration of time into the future, is collapsed down to a very short period of time. And so their whole practice goes from day to day, week to week, month to month, not much further than month to month, with these two questions dominating their thinking. And the way you can tell this, and you and I have seen this every year when we've gone out on the road and talked with clients who are doing their annual plans, it's like the world stops for this brief minute. The team gets together. The advisor sets out a couple of simple to describe goals for the next year, and the team says, "Yep, those would be goals that we should be pursuing." Maybe they talk a little bit about unique value proposition. Most advisors actually don't have one and would admit that they don't actually have one. Maybe they talk a little bit about the commonality of how we'll talk about our practice with clients. Most teams don't have a shared value proposition. Most teams don't have a sense of we're all sharing the same messaging. And this, again, is an artifact of the advisor who is saying, well, I'll go out and find the new clients. You take care of the existing clients. You don't need to know how to talk about the business, which is a terrible waste of great team talent. But everything is collapsed down to this immediate moment. And this is incredibly damaging to the well-being of the business, even though it feels to the advisor like it's the right thing to do. Now, the other dimension of this in terms of keeping the clients you have has to do with the demographics that we're involved with right now and the demographics that are approaching us. And we should take a close look at that. But I think the first big challenge is for advisors to realize they're not thinking into the future the way they need to. They're thinking too close to the present. And that's the first big change that I think advisors need to make.
Yeah, and it's understandable that they do it. I mean, it was all about survival when everyone got into the business. If you couldn't find the next client, you were invited to find something else to do. So, I have a lot of empathy toward advisors, but that habit toward staying in the here and now, what client issues do I need to deal with today? Where do I need to find the next client? It has a lot of manifestations in the practice, but one of the most serious of them is the children of our wealthiest clients and what is really, I mean, it's here now, but what's going to unfold over that intermediate time frame, the next 5 to 10 years? How big of an issue is that for most of our really high functioning practices?
Well, let's look at it from the point of view of the established business. To your point, that's very high functioning and has built a business over 2 decades, 3 decades, and is thinking about succession planning to the next generation. What happens to this business? How do I exit the business well? How do I leave this business to my junior colleagues or perhaps my children if that's part of the succession plan? But to frame this in an important way, I want to go back just for a moment to this issue of time horizon. How long into the future are you thinking? Because if you're thinking on a moment by moment basis, then the issue of demographics and the issue of what's true about an established business doesn't get on your screen until you have some kind of precipitating event. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean by that, and I talk to advisors about this all the time. You talk to advisors about this all the time. Many advisors assume the stability of their business and find themselves quite surprised when a client dies earlier than anticipated. So you have a client that you've worked with for 25 years. Maybe it's a healthy, robust client in the early 70s, clearly should have another 10 or 15 years ahead of them. There's no sense that anything's amiss. There's no sense that there's any at risk. And all of a sudden, there's a health crisis and they die. And now the relationship between them and the advisor is at risk. A lot of times, spouses leave their spouse's advisor when they inherit the money because no effort was made to relate to the spouse. Now, many advisors will say to me, oh yeah, I know the spouse of the client. But it's shocking, really, how often the advisor does not have the same kind of dynamic relationship with the spouse. Certainly with the children, this is a gap. The vast majority of advisors, even those who say, well, I have a relationship with the kids, that relationship is not a dynamic servicing relationship. Those kids aren't engaged with the advisor in a way that it is going to translate into a lot of loyalty when things change. The advisors extended themselves socially, but they haven't become their trusted advisor. Now, why do I say that's an issue of time horizon? Well, if you're thinking on a daily basis, how do I get my next client? And you go to meet with the children of your top 10 clients, let's say, as just as an act of practice management, practice hygiene, those kids don't represent a meaningful client today, next month, even next year. And so for the advisor, it's like, yeah, I really should get to know them. But the question that dominates their thinking is a question of immediate value and immediate relevancy, not relevancy at some point in the future. And so the advisor is stuck between, yeah, I should do that. But what I really want to do is go find someone that can drop another $3 to $5 million into my practice, and I can charge them a fee and grow my business larger. It doesn't make emotional sense to the advisor unless the advisor is willing to do something that most advisors don't do, and that is expand their time horizon to what is a longer point of relevancy. And you do that by asking yourself the question, what business do I want to be in 5 years from now? What business do I want to be in, or what business do I want to be handing off to my successor 5 years from now? We live right now in a time of inflated valuations of practices. The private equity world has just flooded financial services in 2026 with an enormous amount of money. And so valuations have been inflated. What we're starting to see, though, is the tightening of those valuations as the private equity folks are looking at this and saying, look, we don't want to buy a business that isn't going to be there in 5 years. And this is something that it doesn't occur to the advisor until they take that longer time horizon perspective. What business do I want to be in 5 years? Now, everyone can relate to this. When we all went off to college and we were, 18 or 19 years of age, and we went off to take a 4-year degree that maybe would turn into a couple of extra more years of graduate school, that seemed like an eternity away. Now, I can tell you, as someone who has 2 graduate degrees, and I have one of my children is a physician, the ability to say, I'm going to go through 4 years of college, and I'm going to go through another 3 years of medical school, and I'm going to go to another 2 years of internship and residency. So it's going to be 10 years before I'm going to be in a position to capitalize on this. But the ability to do that means that 10 years from now, I have created a structure that is enormously productive. And that's the issue right now today. And the point, to your point, Scott, it's not just that time horizon matters. For any advisor at any time in the history of the financial services industry, this has been an important thing to be able to do. What business do I want to be in 5 years? If I want to be in the business of working with ultra high net worth clients, I'm going to have credentialing and intellectual preparedness to be relevant to those people. And that's going to take me some time to develop. If I want to have a niche practice into a very lucrative group of very specialized individuals, I'm going to have to go get into that space. I'm going to go have to establish myself. I'm going to have to build a brand. If I want to build a network of referral advocates, CPAs and attorneys who think I'm the bee's knees and are going to, lend their credibility to me and send me clients, I'm going to have to build trust with those people. This is going to take time. And this is something that some advisors get and many advisors don't. And then they wonder why they seem to be blocked from the kind of acceleration and productivity that these great advisors get. So the first issue, Scott, is that the advisor has to think about 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now as a real thing that they're working on today. And that's separate from the immediate issues of demographics, which are also something that we should talk about.
So, it's really fascinating, Ken, when you talk about the immediacy of the practice. And when we're in there talking to teams, it's always about those issues of today. But you know, when you get into that scramble mode of dealing with what needs to be done, we think about these issues become binary. Every client is fine until they're not. Every client is healthy until they're not. And in fact, that's not a good way or even a real way to look at the client base. And so those demographics that you're thinking about that you've alluded to, we need to take a second about it, and look at that because this is truly a daunting, daunting problem and an existential threat to most advisors' practices.
It really is, Scott. And the problem is it's like living on an earthquake zone or in a hurricane area, you know. I used to live in Southwest Florida for many years, and every year you would hope that there wouldn't be a hurricane. And the first several years I lived in Southwest Florida, there wasn't one. And so the fact of hurricanes and the impact of hurricanes didn't seem real until a Category 5 hurricane hit square where I lived, and the actual devastation of these things was a real experience. And it's not until then that you see people actually waking up. The sale of chainsaws and generators in the year after a hurricane is exponentially greater than in the year before. And that's just human nature. But let's bring it to real for advisors right now. There's two statistics that when I say them, advisors will recognize, and immediately their brain will make a fuzzy feeling come over them. Because advisors don't want this to be true, even though at some level they know it's true, and their brain is going to want to protect them from this. And I will tell you, I can't even begin to count the number of advisors where I've raised these two statistics, and the advisor's like, yeah, but they don't apply to me. It's the most common response. The first is the following, and this has been true for 20 years, and it's been confirmed by several different major research studies, and every major firm has the same data points inside. They don't talk about it because they don't know what to do about it, but that is at least 81% of high net worth clients, when they inherit the wealth from their parents, will leave their advisor. Now, that's a statistic, and advisors can look at that and say, well, I have a relationship with them and I'm doing great with them. Most of the advisors who say that have the children have not yet taken full control over all the wealth. But the statistics across the industry are extremely predictable that most grown children, when they inherit the wealth, will leave. And there's a psychological reason for this. It's because they grow up and they want to make decisions on their own. They've been waiting to inherit the money from mommy and daddy, and now they've inherited, and they don't want the constraint of the advisor that mom and dad worked with. They want to grow up, leave home, and do it on their own. If you think about most people who've grown up and left home, they're not using the same doctor that their parents used. They're not using any of the same services their parent used. And by the way, in many cases, the next generation wants to use different tools than their parents did and have a different experience of investing the money. 81%. Now, advisors look at that and say, okay, well, I guess I'll have to worry about that at some point. Well, here's the other statistic that has come home to roost. We have been talking about the great transfer of wealth for the last decade. Trillions of dollars are going to transition from one generation to the next. And that has been happening in a trickle. But we just hit a demographic breakpoint that's incredibly significant. And that is the oldest baby boomer turned 80 in 2026, this year. Now, we've never been here before. Because now you look at the mortality tables and you realize that about half the baby boomers are going to die predictably. That's why insurance works, because they can calculate this in the next 5 to 7 years. And that mortality is built in. It's part of the process. And if 81% of the children of baby boomers will tend to leave their advisor when they inherit the wealth, and half the baby boomers are going to die in the next 5 to 7 years, or thereabouts, we have a situation now that if the advisor says, what business do I want to be in 5 to 7 years from now? And what business do I want to hand off to the person who's going to be paying that residual to me for 5 years after that? Is this the time for me to start thinking about leaving? If you look at the demographics of your practice, and by the way, many advisors haven't. I talk to advisors all the time and I say, well, how well diversified is your business? And they say, oh, yeah, it's very diversified. And I say, well, let's talk about, where does 90% of your revenue come from? 10 clients. And how many of those clients are over the age of 75? A lot. You begin to see the problem. If your mindset is, I need to get another client now, I need to, whatever the client's needs are, I need to have somebody else service it, but I need to go build new business, and 10 clients make up the majority of your business, and that is not an uncommon statistic for many advisors, then what we have is a perfect storm of challenges coming that the advisor has to decide what they want to do about it. And I think that's the first step of deciding what you want to do about it, is to becoming aware, ooh, there's something I need to do something about here. So that's the first necessary step. And that's why I say for many advisors, their brain is going to be like, oh, I don't want to think about this. That's too painful. But those statistics are telling you something that you probably need to grapple with.
Well, Ken, I can relate unbelievably clearly to it's too painful, I don't want to think about it, because there's two baby boomers on this podcast. And if half of us are going to die in 5 to 7 years, I frankly don't like either one of those outcomes. And as you were going through it, I'm like, that's half of us. And that's really frightening, right? And it's just easier not to think about it. It's easier to say, yeah, but we take good care of ourselves. We're kind of near the younger side. It's still, the statistics are the statistics. Those
Exactly.
mortality tables count. So,
Yeah, it's the pig and the python going up the stream. The
right.
baby boomers are in this really tight cluster of 20 years. And, once you get over the age of 80, you are going to have a meaningful fall off of those, as well as those who are under the age of 80 are going to have health issues and other dynamics. Now, what do you do about it?
What do you do? That's the
Decide-
question, right? So if you're willing to absorb, if you're willing to internalize something that you don't want to, because it's really comfortable to work on the day to day, and it feels good to work on the day to day, and it's really comforting to think everyone's fine until they're not. But if you're willing to confront those two things, what do you do about it?
Well, the more expensive thing to do in terms of time, effort, and energy is to get really serious about new business. Most advisors, as much as they think about where can I find the new client, they don't have a systematic process of generating new business to their practice. If the advisor is inclined to say, well, I'm just not going to keep those clients, I'll have to replace them with new clients, it's time to start ramping up with those new business acquisition efforts. The problem with that is, once an advisor gets to a certain level of established business, the comfort of managing the business and occasionally bringing in a new client makes it really difficult to think about going back out and saying, well, in the next 5 to 7 years, I've got to replace a significant percentage of my clients. That is not a motivator that most advisors want to embrace. They actually want to find some way to not have to do that. I think more importantly is the issue that goes to the base of every business. It's much more expensive to acquire a new client than to keep a client. Well, you have access to the children of your best clients, and there are some proven ways to become a character of significance and establish yourself in the lives of those adult children. I was just at a major conference in one of our partner firms, and the CEO of one of the largest asset management companies in the world was a speaker there. And obviously, I was interested in what he had to say. And he was asked about his financial advisor, why he picked the advisor he worked with, and what it was the advisor did for him. And one of the first things he said is, my advisor has a personal relationship with all of my children. So he said that was really important to me, that I had a sense that the wealth that I've created and the security that I've built was going to be passed down effectively to the next circle of generation. And that my advisor relating to my kids and building a relationship with the kids and having the kids relate to him as their trusted advisor that they regard, that they feel connected to, that they are going to work with going forward was really important to me, because it reassured me that all the effort that I put into this was going to continue. So look, for the advisor who's interested in building a business that's going to be sustainable 5, 7, 10 years from now, I would suggest the most important thing you could do would be to start working with families who are your uniquely successful top revenue producers, and begin working with the originators of the wealth and connecting to the next generation through a family legacy process. Now, we're at this break point in terms of demographics. So when was the best time to start doing legacy work with families? Well, the best time to start is about 2 years before they sell the business. The second best time to start is now. Now, as they say, what's the best time to plant a tree? 25 years ago. What's the second best time? Plant it now. You do what you can do with it. You start working in legacy work with families. You shift your mindset from the originators are my client to the family is my client. And you begin helping the originators and the next generation, and maybe the generation below that, articulate their values, clarify a vision, and come into a conversational process where the values of each other and the vision of each other can inform and mature the decision-making musculature of the family. The advisor, in this case, begins to help the family develop the competencies in communication and governance so that the wealth is seen as a resource preserved across generations. And more importantly, the advisor is seen as part of the stewardship of that wealth, because the advisor understands the governance process and the values of the family. Now, that is not an easy task. We certainly have a lot of resources at the Advisor Institute to help people with it. But the point is, can the advisor shift their mental gears and say, I'm not just going to think about next week or next month. I'm going to think about 5 years from now, and I'm going to start taking actions in my business right now to try to close the back door so that when clients get sick, it's not the first time that I introduce myself to the kids when they have 6 months left to live and the kids looking at me going, where have you been? The time to do that is now, when everyone's healthy and there's plenty of runway for those conversations to happen. And the more I can get advisors to see that as the next great opportunity, the more stable those businesses will be in going forward.
Well, Ken, I mean, it's just a great discussion. And I hope our advisors, our listeners, understand that we approach this with a great deal of empathy, which is why the first part of this podcast was why it's so hard. It's really understandable to stay rooted in the day-to-day. It feels comfortable and safe to stay rooted in the day-to-day. But the thing that I love about what you did is the cure for this is going to be uncomfortable. So we either have to have that discomfort in getting really serious about replacing assets, and not just replacing assets. That 60-year-old advisor or 70-year-old advisor got to go find 50-year-old clients, which is challenging. But if you're going to be uncomfortable with the kids. Think about that wealth differently. Redefine your role in the life of that family and not just in the originators. This has been a fascinating discussion, Ken. As our listeners return to their busy world of running their practices, let me remind them that we love your ideas for future podcast topics. If you've got something you want to hear Ken opine on, just message him on his LinkedIn profile or message me on mine. That's a wrap for this edition of Secrets of Successful Advisors with Ken Heyman, the podcast where we explore the science of clients, setting instincts aside so that insights can guide.